Our next speaker is Dr. Cole Crumpacker, a Poultry Science Department alum, so aim high. And he will be presenting Metapneumovirus, and he is originally from Arkansas or Missouri, this area, and he lives near Ozark, and he went to Missouri for vet med, and he decided to come back to the poultry industry because it's so amazing. And he sees all different aspects of the poultry industry, and he works for Butterball, and I'll turn it over to him.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me. Today I'm going to be discussing kind of what I would call the elephant in the room, especially in the poultry industry the last couple of years, and that's avian metapneumovirus. Anyone that's been involved with the poultry industry in recent years knows the impact that this has had, especially on the turkey industry. I'll also touch a little bit on Butterball and welfare within our company. So as Sean has said, I graduated here from the University of Arkansas in 2020 and then attended veterinary school at the University of Missouri College of Veterinary Medicine. So just a little background on Butterball and our live ops locations. We have 5 different live ops locations here, Arkansas, Missouri, and North Carolina. Our company as a whole produces over 1 billion pounds of turkey every year. These are the weight classes of birds that we raise. This will come in and be very important later on in the presentation, discussing pneumovirus and different weight classes of birds. So just touching base on our animal care and well-being mission statement. Butterball is committed to being a leader in responsible animal care and well-being practices to mainly produce wholesome food products for our customers and analyze our operations to ensure continuous improvements. We use science-based practices with appropriate training and implementation and oversight of all associates in our contract and suppliers. So starting out, Butterball has their own in-house food safety and animal care team. We train our growers, all of our employees. We are American Humane certified. Actually, audits are going on as we speak in Ozark. We have an internal hotline for any welfare concerns that any employee comes across. We do quarterly internal audits, as well as annual certification for our growers and euthanasia training. We have a very robust team of people that work with logistics to ensure proper stock and densities with our different weight classes of birds. So this is a little background on AHA. This is an intensive and care management program of our turkeys that require multiple farm and plant visits with very strict criteria. We were the first vertically integrated company to reach this. And our third-party auditors are required to visit 1/3 of our farms every single year. This is a touching base on our kind of the results and how many farms that we covered last year during AHA audits. As you can see there, we audited a total of 212 farms. So now touching base on kind of what we look at in those audits. When we're auditing the welfare and the grow out, we're looking at emergency response plans, health status of the birds, biosecurity practices, sort of your flaws, access to water and feed, a proper pest control program, adequate ventilation and litter moisture, on-farm euthanasia, mortality disposal, lighting programs and gate scoring. Other considerations, you know, natural daylight or at least 4 hours of darkness. In turkeys, we utilize natural ventilation. So a lot of our farms go off natural daylight. Ammonia under 25 parts per million, litter quality, and as mentioned before, housing conditions and biosecurity. Record keeping, accurate mortality records, stocking density, and euthanasia. We also audit each location's loadout procedure. All personnel involved in loading must be trained in our policies and bird handling. It's very important that the birds remain calm while driving and herding to the end of the house. We have two different types of loading in the turkey industry, manual cooping and then auto loaders. Here in the Midwest, we utilize manual, and on the East Coast, a lot of auto loaders. In brood and move settings, we also have poult transfer. So the bird is actually brooded on one farm until about 5 weeks of age and then moved to a grow out farm. So we audit that process as well. Major nonconformances with this is physical abuse of birds during catching and transport and loss of any birds on the trailer. So now switching gears to avian metapneumovirus, I'll begin with a little background of the disease, take a deep dive into our vaccination journey, and then tie it back into how that pertains to welfare. So avian metapneumovirus, type A and B was introduced into the US in late 2023. There had been previous detections of type C in the late 90s, early 2000s, but they were able to mitigate that. This unfortunately does not appear that it's going away anytime soon. So if you look at the map here, late 2023, early 2024, avian metapneumovirus type B took the East Coast by storm. Quickly started seeing cases in the Midwest, predominantly type B at the beginning, and then quickly switched to all type A. The type is very important. Type A is much more severe than type B. So pretty much all of my experiences with type A, so everything that I'll talk about today is based off of type A. So clinical signs with this virus, it affects any age of turkey. The youngest I've seen it is 9 days of age. You see a sneaking, coughing, gurgling, as you can see here. All of those clinical signs, dirty nostrils, sinusitis, obvious increase in mortality and morbidity of the bird as well. The virus itself doesn't actually kill the bird. It immunosuppresses the bird so much that they end up succumbing to secondary bacterial infections such as E. coli, ORT, and Bordetella. So oftentimes by the time you see these clinical signs, oftentimes you can't even isolate the virus by then. So that goes to show, while they're incubating this virus and picking up all these secondary bacterial infections, we have no idea that they have the virus. And so we'll kind of touch on later. That's why being proactive and consistent with management is so important with this disease. Clinical signs, extremely lethargic, as you can see here on the left. These are birds that have gotten extremely cold. This is what we would call birds being crowed up. No activity at all in the house. Many times last winter, walked in a house and thought we had high path. I mean, there's just not a sound in the house, just extremely morbid birds. And obviously with that decreased water consumption and feed consumption. One parameter that we used daily to help us gauge how we were doing management wise with this disease was water consumption. So how is it spread? Honestly, it's still poorly understood, unfortunately, but we know for a fact that it is everywhere, at least within our system. All indications point towards more of a airborne, an aerosolized transmission. So here's some mortality examples. Mortality typically lasts for 7 to 10 days per barn. So as you can see here on top, mortality started at 132, and a week later was up to 537 for the farm, and by the end of the week, over 2,000 birds a day. And unfortunately, this became extremely normal. I mean, phone was blowing up every day, just farms texting thousands of birds, and it was it was right after I started, and it was not at all what I was used to. I learned a lot very quick. And as you can see on the bottom, these birds are only 2 weeks old. I put this one on here because if there's any comorbidities such as early Bordetella, E. coli, or chick or poult quality issues, it can really exacerbate the disease. So these birds, as you can see here, I think day 2, yeah, they lost 333. So these birds got really cold at day 2. And so they piled, they were stressed, they got cold. So they had some lingering issues there, had some E. coli come up week 2, and then bam, went from 58 birds to 656 aMPV positive. And also, due to the severe immunosuppression, it can lead to other disease issues down the road as well. This is a particular farm that transferred from the brood hub at about 6 weeks. First couple weeks on the farm, everything going good. They actually went through pneumo on the brood hub. And so this week 9, that was some E. coli, ORT related mortality. Numbers went back to normal. And then end of week 10 into week 11, as you could see there, mortality jumped way up. And this ended up being cholera. And we had a lot of increase in cholera cases secondary, or maybe even at the same time as aMPV as well, due to the severe immunosuppression. So before we had vaccination, I'll kind of go over the tools that we use. Number 1, eliminate ammonia, keep the environment good in your barns, increase your minimum ventilation, always try to keep the humidity below 60%. And if any clinical signs, do not till your litter. We routinely till in the turkey industry, as opposed to some other people in the industry. The worst thing you can do for aMPV is chill the birds. If the birds get cold, it's over with. You have to aggressively increase your set temperature. And I'm not talking 2 to 4 degrees. I'm talking 10, 15 degrees immediately when you see clinical signs. These birds go through a lot of fever and chills. And if you do not increase a set temperature, they will not be active. And kind of in the same boat, be very cautious with tunnel wind speed. We probably naturally ventilated more the last 2 summers than ever. And that was because to keep the wind speed off the birds. The birds will want to sit down, they'll get cold, they do not like air. Even in our old conventional style houses with push fans in the center, where the temperature in the house is very similar to outside, maybe 15 to 20 degrees below. I've been to a lot of farms last year that it was 110 heat index outside. Birds are going through pneumo, 10, 11 weeks old, and they were cold. And you shut off every fan in the house, in a naturally ventilated house, and the birds will get up and eat. That's 110 degrees outside. So going with that, avoid wind and drafts. Constant water sanitation and acidification is very important. Any break in that can have tremendously negative effects. And most importantly, respond to what the birds are telling you. Like I was saying, often we had to go to extreme measures to keep these birds comfortable. And we found out that as opposed to other diseases, with this disease, you didn't actually want to walk the houses more. You wanted to try to move the birds with the controller, as we called it. So it's very important to keep good litter quality early in the flock, because it's not if, it's when you're going to get aMPV, unfortunately. So the better condition you can keep your litter in, hopefully litter will be in good condition and they can regulate their temperature more, they can bed in the litter. Obviously, we do not want to till with any aMPV signs, make early adjustments. And, we were all learning this together, and sometimes it was the hard way, unfortunately. So we tried a lot of different things before we had vaccine. And, there was some glimmers of hope in certain houses maybe, but nothing worked across the board. We tried fogging trials, chlorine-based fogging trials, expectorant trials, water additives such as citric acid to promote water consumption, as well as, trialed antibiotics on certain trials. And antibiotics, we didn't feel it would not be judicious use of antibiotics within our system due to our E. coli sensitivities are all resistant to penicillin and oxytet. So here's a chart of our Midwest aMPV cases by month. As you can see here, extreme seasonal component to this, and that's kind of what I'll allude to here in a little bit about the vaccine. Is there's a lot of uncertainty right now because the field challenge is very low right now. So we have seen traditionally last winter, our cases are the highest, most diagnosed in October, November, so those birds will be processed in December, January, February. Here's a chart. This is flock sold. So this is our positive rate. So as you can see, quickly last spring, it went from 0 to 100, pretty close. And then things kind of took a dip in the summer, and then getting into this time of year, October, November, we quickly rose again. As you can see on top, we just flatlined 100%. Every flock in the entire Midwest is positive for around 5-6 months. So now going into the vaccine. The vaccines that have been imported have been available and used in Europe for 30 years. Those are the vaccines that are approved. We only use Zoetis type A. Well, I say predominantly use Zoetis type A. And their takeaways was that type A is better for the type A infection. Obviously, type B does show cross protection, but is not as effective. So the recommendations from Zoetis and the Europeans, a core spray application. We started on April 1st. That was the first day it was available. And then we started field applications on April 21st. And this was the first, these group of vaccines were the first modified live vaccines in the animal health industry imported into the U.S. So our early observations after we started vaccinating, 12% of our flocks were showing signs before we could even make it to the first field vaccine. And over half of our flocks were showing clinical signs in between the first and second field vaccine. This wasn't at all what we expected, really wasn't what any of the colleagues in Europe had mentioned. We were seeing a lot different things over here. Of the first 80% or 80 vaccinated flocks, 10% had very severe mortality. Severe as in probably over 10% mortality. So we suspected that this was the wild type coming in, so we needed to move up our vaccine to get protection earlier. But there was no way to know this at the time because there wasn't sequencing available for us to differentiate vaccine versus wild. So we had to wait. So we ended up moving our field boost to 2 and 6 weeks to try to get an earlier protection because we thought it was the field strain coming in before they were protecting. So the clinical signs and a lot of the moderate to severe mortality went away. But it goes back to what I was saying, we're getting into June and we see a lot less field challenge then and a lot less severity in cases. So we did a hatchery take trial, and with this vaccine, the only way to monitor it is essentially to swab a lot of birds. Unfortunately, you can't rely on serology at all. It's more of a local immune response in the upper respiratory tract and not as much as systemic with the vaccine. So what we concluded with the spray vaccine in the hatchery, that our birds really weren't cycling the vaccine efficiently until around 3 weeks of age, which is very long compared to a lot of respiratory vaccines on the chicken side, which is really all we have to go off of from the turkey industry. So this told us that we weren't getting good vaccine takes in the hatchery. And some flocks, even the whole time, had no detectable vaccine throughout their entire life. As I mentioned, cycling is delayed. It's more of a rolling reaction and not an exponential increase. So this is what a rolling reaction looks like. When we were on spray vaccine, what this ended up doing is causing the birds to have clinical signs really for quite a while, 4 to 6 weeks in some flocks, not counting if they had any field challenge. So rolling reaction, day 7, this represents like 5% of the birds. So as you can see, maybe out of the hatchery, one of the birds in this group effectively got the vaccine and is starting to build an immune response. So we go to day 14, one bird gives it to 2 other birds. Vaccine appears to be a little different than like infectious bronchitis or anything else. A lot of the chicken vaccines are pretty efficient on transmitting from maybe 1 to 10, 15 birds, as opposed to, it appears to be 1 to 2 so far. So by 3 weeks, day 21, our one original bird there is now cycled the vaccine and is protected. And now all these others are cycling vaccine. So you could see the trend here. That's not what we want, if you were curious. So, during this time frame, we didn't have the technology. We were still waiting on the technology to sequence, to differentiate all these clinical signs we were seeing, if they were vaccine or the wild type. And so finally, when we got a lot of our results back, we realized that most of the clinical signs that we were seeing, especially in birds under 5.5, 6 weeks old, it was all vaccine, which was very concerning. And we had to figure out why that was quick. So we updated our protocol again. July 28th, we moved to 4 and 8 weeks because we knew that the birds were cycling vaccine at 3 weeks. And so when they're coming off the vaccine, when the CT values are waning, we'll hit them with the field boost. And so it would be really nice if we could just play our Uno reverse card and flip that chart around, but unfortunately, it's not that easy. So how are we going to improve our hatchery takes and get more birds exposed to this early? So we're confident in the timeline of cycling with the spray. And so now we tried the hatchery gel trial. And with this, we had some pretty promising numbers at first. Still do, just not maybe as consistent, but numbers looked a lot better. And at this point, we really didn't have anything to lose. So we switched to gel across the board and started to get some better eggs. And so as you see here, the orange line is our gel, and the blue line is the spray. So spray was the first couple protocols, and then gel's our latest. And so kind of behind the scenes during all this, I mean, it seemed like we were starting a new trial every single week. That we had so many things going on. Everyone was, we were collaborating with Zoetis and other integrators, just racking our brains trying to figure out, what the problem is. So we conducted a maternal antibody trial. I believe 8 farms, no hatchery vaccine trial. Some of flocks remained negative throughout the entire flock, even with multiple field boosts. We sprayed flocks, day of age at placement, would not recommend that. Other gel versus spray trials, vaccine handling, temperature of the vaccine, anything you can think of, different stabilizers, this and that, we've probably tried it. Compared foggers, like the one shown in the top right, to more sprayers with coarse droplets around the 180 to 200 micron range, which is what we use. Field boost take trials. So as you can see, the bottom left, we've went through there after vaccination, caught X amount of birds per house, spray painted the birds. Now we're going back and trying to correlate vaccine take and PCR results together to really see if we're getting enough vaccine where it needs to be, behind the eye and the Hardarian gland. So this is what we have learned is, from a welfare standpoint, is even though our mortality has still been honestly pretty close to the same as what it was this time last year, our vaccinated flocks, these birds are, I believe, probably 8, 9 weeks old. The entire house looks like this: swollen sinuses, dirty nostrils, gurgle, just sound like a flock of geese, really. Those birds are running to you. Before vaccine, they'd all be very, very depressed and lethargic. So that is a positive. It does seem like something's there. We just have to figure it out. Vaccine at this time is not a silver bullet. It may not ever be. but we really have to keep our focus still on our management and bird comfort, because if we don't have that, the vaccine can't work. You always, you can't lose sight of management and bird comfort at all with this. So closing thoughts, our livability is the same to slightly worse compared to last year with no vaccine. We're focusing on solving our hatchery component, and then we'll move into more field application. Questions, we have a lot more questions than answers. We're having to reinvent the wheel. Europe didn't even have PCR when this vaccine came out. And so there's no great data to help us out. And honestly, what we've learned, at least on the type A side, doesn't seem to correlate very well. So it's still too early to know if the vaccine is working, and it depends what your definition of working is. Do you want to see the improvement in welfare and bird activity? But at the end of the day, if you're still losing birds, from a business standpoint, how long is that going to last? Another component of that, as I alluded to, is seasonality. Unfortunately, we got this vaccine at a time where our disease is always improving. So a lot of people have maybe not false, but, sort of get tunnel vision and think that it's working, and maybe they need to look at their numbers. So collaborative research with this is very critical. You need to focus on numbers. We all want to think it's working, but we really don't know yet. And so correlating all this back into welfare, we've learned that the vaccination is not naive. These birds are mounting an immune response, and essentially we're giving them a rolling reaction. So it appears to be so far. And so you could break down every single aspect of vaccination and how it can correlate to welfare. We talk about gel and spray. Well, gel, there's twice as much volume in the pulp box as there is spray. So you could run into, are you chilling the birds? A lot of our pulps are on the truck for 12 to 18 hours. And, that plays a role into things too. If the vaccine works, what good does it do if you pile up 1,000 birds day one every time they place, or, you know what I mean? So temperature, whether that be even the barn itself or the vaccine itself, because when we apply this vaccine, tremendously cold water, turkey's behavior is so much different than chicken. They want to pile up. Temperatures in the barn, we need to focus on keeping good temperature, keeping the birds hot enough, warm enough, as well as dye. We use a blue dye, which most dyes are, but we had a difficult time at first actually getting enough dye in our vaccine to show up on the bird. And so when you go to exploring other dyes, especially different colors, you could lead to maybe less preening off of other birds, which decreases your vaccine uptake or this and that. Or if you, for whatever reason, want to use a red dye, not good with turkeys. Cannibalism. Another thing we have to think about is our welfare during the vaccination process. So the two diagrams on top is sort of our standard vaccination route protocol. So we have two people with backpack sprayers in the house, typically walk in the outer thirds of the house, and we have an individual or two walk the middle of the house and what we call flag the birds to part them in the middle. And we've also tried, like mentioned or showed in the bottom there, where we actually push the birds to the middle. And we're currently kind of working on a trial with that to see if there's any difference in take. But the big thing to remember is with turkeys, there's so many comorbidities and things you have to take into account in the age of the birds. Like, you know, one protocol may work for 2 to 4 week old birds, and the other protocol would not work for 8 week old birds, or this and that. The behavior is so different, and so that's really why we like the top two. You know, the birds stay pretty calm. And it works for all ages of birds for us. So, you know, as we discussed, you know, circling it back to welfare, the mortality and morbidity is so severe. But everything you do with this disease, in my opinion, management wise, it's a double-edged sword, really. So, you know, when you think about changing ventilation, your temperature increases. So, you know, say you increase your temperature, well, you need to bump your fan time. Also, with temperature increase, you have more artificial CO2 in the house, as well as more humidity, which essentially sort of suppresses bird activity. And you know, with that, to keep these birds warm, to keep the air right, we had to develop programs to assist growers in paying for heat supplements over the winter. You know, to give the birds really what they needed. Litter condition, you know, tilling, depending on what time you till, you could really blow up aMPV. You can make it worse. So do you till and risk that, or do you till and have dry litter to where they can regulate their temperature better? Another thing to think about, density, you know, our toms versus hens, different densities are hens tend to have a worse livability due to more birds in the house being more dense as opposed to toms. Logistics is a big thing. Stress from loadout and transfer. In the turkey industry, we do a lot of brood and move, and so, like I mentioned earlier, these birds are loaded onto a truck and moved to a finished farm at around 5 weeks of age, and so it's so convenient that that's around the time that aMPV likes to show up. And so I believe last winter we only had 2 negative flocks transfer off the brood hub. So as you can imagine, when these birds get on the trailer and you can't change the schedule, you know, the schedules are set months in advance, typically, for sure weeks. And, you know, even though if that farm's going through aMPV, you can't change the schedule, and it's a huge stressor on the birds. You know, oftentimes we'll lose a lot after we transfer. Increased DOAs at the plant. You know, early on in the disease, we tried to push some flocks in early that were going through mortality, like we would with maybe some other diseases like a cholera. That was a terrible decision. A lot of train wrecks, trying to load birds and with DOAs. So, you know, learn the hard way there at the beginning. So, you know what, regardless of what you do, what I've learned in the aMPV journey is, if you really sit down and think about it, every decision that you make as a veterinarian will impact the welfare of the animal. Every single one. Bumping the temperature up 1 degree, bumping it 10 degrees, giving them this antibiotic, this or that. Every single decision you make will have an impact, welfare impact on the animal. So with that, any questions?
You stay there. could come up here if you'd like, but it looks like we do have time for questions this time. I'm gonna start. And this story reminds me of when I worked at Hormel in Minnesota. I worked in hog procurement. And the month after I started, PEDV came to town. So sounds familiar story there. But my question related to that is PEDV likes the cold. So when that came around, I was talking to truckers quite a bit, and they were building ovens to bake trucks clean because they would wash trucks and then they'd freeze, so the bug would stay alive on the truck. So what is the bug like? Because it sounds like heat and cold is a major theme here.
Yeah, and that's still a component that, to my knowledge, is pretty poorly understood. Um, PEDV is fecal oral, correct? Perfect. Sounds the same. Okay. Um, so with that, I mean, there definitely does appear to be a temperature component. Um, I think some of it has to do with maybe the way we ventilate in the certain times of year. Um, yeah, I mean, most of our farms are curtain sided. Not all, but quite a few. Um, and so the different times of year, I think, the way you bring the air in and things can contribute to viral load. Um, that's just my opinion. There's nothing to support that, but
Any other questions?
Good job, Cole. A versus B in the turkey, what are the differences? None?
don't even get me started.
Okay.
Type B, the cases that I've seen, I mean, very, very, very mild compared to type A. One thing I did forget to mention with the vaccine is the birds that are dying that have been vaccinated. There's so much more E. coli in the bird than what there is on non-vaccinated birds, which will make sense if you think about it. If they're getting protected, it's going to take more of that pathogen. The infectious dose will be much higher. It's going to take more of the virus for them to become immunosuppressed if they get a field challenge, therefore more bacteria. But as far as the difference, disease in the field, um, mortality ranges with most of the type B cases, I would say, 1 to 5%. With aMPV type A, on average, I would say 5 to 60+%. And I think there's type A paralyzes the cilia more. Dr. Hargis, you can correct me, I guess, if I'm wrong. But the way I understand is type A is more celiostatic than type B. So there may be a component there as to why type A is more
Same thing in the chicken.
severe.
I mean, some of the B is like a serological event. You don't really know what happened.
Yeah, and originally on the East Coast and turkeys, that was how it was first discovered here. They presented with neurologic signs and actually had middle ear infections because of the immunosuppression. But we have had a few neurologic flocks, but nothing of which really caused mortality.
So from a diagnostic perspective, are you making most of these diagnoses based on positive PCR, clinical appearance, serology?
Yeah, good question. So unfortunately for this disease, when it comes to the vaccine, the PCR swabs are, swab and PCR for the virus is the only way really we have to monitor. The vaccine is all over the place when it comes to serology. But on field type, wild type, yes, all of that. We swab every flock. We never stop swabbing, even though we knew what it was. We always confirmed, and then we double check with serology as well. Oftentimes the titers what we would consider a positive would be like your group 4 and over, 6,000 plus titer, 5 to 6,000.
I'm not a scientist, so this is probably a dumb question. I think I heard you say that this vaccine has been used for decades in Europe. Or was this a surprise to them, the difficulty that you had with flock it kicking in, or was this something that they had as well?
I personally don't know. But what I do know is that when they started vaccinating, the entire industry started vaccinating at once, and that's chickens, broiler breeders, breeding companies, all of them. All of them started vaccinating at once, and their problems went away within Europe for probably took 3 to 5 years, but they saw a tremendous amount of improvement pretty quick, and part of that was the whole entire poultry industry probably started vaccinating at the same time. But it is very, very interesting that we're having as much issues, because when you break down the sequencing of the vaccine and our wild strand, I mean, it's 96% similar. So we just have to figure out the application piece.
Excellent talk, by the way. You were the wild card and you were very good. So speaking of application, you mentioned the spray gel and coming from pigs to poultry. I thought that was such a great thing, tapping into the preening behavior or allopreening from each other, but certainly the dose amount can vary quite a bit. And then there's a lot of loss because it absorbs it doesn't go into the chick, right? So can you just comment on generally spray gel vaccination and in your application for pneumo?
So I'll start with spray. The issue that I think, we're having with spray is it has to get in the mucosa, has to get in the eyes or the mouth for the bird to absorb it in the amount of immune response. And so we're trying to figure out, how much of the vaccine do we need? That's a big question is, do we want 15 gel droplets on a bird, or do we want 1,000 really fine mist particles that, factoring in surface area, what do we need or what do we want? The spray dries very quick, and we still don't even really know the viability of the vaccine. It's very sensitive to light and temperature, but we don't know how long it stays alive, essentially. So, if we use our gel, if we use the gel, maybe just that one drop that they get will be sufficient enough for an immune response, and maybe the vaccine itself lasts longer in the gel. We don't know that, unfortunately. PCR detects dead or alive DNA, and so you never know unless you isolate it, which there won't be enough virus there to do that with vaccine, probably. So,
Sounds like there needs to be a lot of research in that area.
yeah, we're working on it. So.
Okay. All right. Any other questions? Oh.
Can you repeat that, sir, please?
Heritage flocks of turkeys, the
Her-
old-fashioned types. Do you know if they're affected
Heritage breeds.
to the same extent?
I'm not 100% sure on that question, but a lot of heritage breeds may have more of a, access to outdoor component. A lot different production there. What we do know is this really isn't an issue in backyard birds for whatever reason. So is that a density thing, or what's the reasoning for that? And so I don't know for sure, but I know a lot of the backyard birds have had zero issues with it, to my knowledge.